or maybe there we go. Okay, we are officially started. Hey, everybody that's jumping on this call. As always, we want to encourage you, if you can just put in the chat where you are, your chapter, your college. We're always super interested to know where folks are joining us from. But we're so happy to have y'all here for an afternoon of learning. For those of you who have been to any of these sessions before, you will know that we like to keep things pretty informal. So if you need to put it on mute and grab some snacks, it's okay to eat on the call with us. If you want to drink, you got some sparkling water, some coffee, whatever it is. We are just here to increase our knowledge and improve our skills. And we really do have a treat today, as we're going to hear about technical writing. And if you're on this call, you may be an advisor and you may be thinking, I want to learn a little bit more about how I can serve my students through technical writing and through getting better at scholarship applications and those types of things. You may be a chapter leader and you're on here thinking, I'm about to apply for top scholarships. I'm going to submit Hallmark Awards. Maybe you're applying for a job and you really want to make sure that your writing is as good as it can be. But we're just happy to have you here on the call, and we are really in for a treat today, as we'll hear from one of our top chapter advisors and a member of the Honors Program Council to guide us through best practices for technical writing. But I wanted to, before I turn it over to get everything started, and we see lots of y'all jumping on the call. I love looking in the chat and just scrolling and seeing, I'm already seeing, South Carolina and Texas, probably lots of Missouri, lots of other places on there. Welcome, whether you're, first time on here, you come to lots of them. Some of you may be watching this later. And so if you're watching this, like, hey, I see, hi, Blake, nice to see you. Always wonderful to see all of our friends. At Phi Theta Kappa, and y'all know this, but I will say it, we are like the most welcoming and supportive network you could ever have. We're also like this big PTK family of scholars and leaders and learners. And so we really love getting to be on these calls because, some of you we will maybe see at annual convention at Catalyst, but all throughout the year at kind of virtual events like this, but also on social media, we get to engage with you and talk about student success and all the great things that are happening at our almost 1,300 chapters. So we really appreciate y'all being here. I want to take this opportunity to make sure that you know that as you go through your chapter activities, and we know there's a lot going on, right? Like at your chapter level, maybe you're focused right now on service, maybe you're focused on honors and action projects and college project. We certainly hope you'll be a 5-star chapter this year. Maybe you're focused on scholarship applications, you're really participating in your campus community. Whatever it is that you're doing at the chapter level, we always want you to know that you have a student engagement team behind you, cheering you on, but also available to engage with you, whatever your needs are. Maybe you're not sure about one of our programs and you want to learn more. Maybe you just need a little bit of advice on how to get students to be engaged. But you can see our student engagement team all here. I am Dr. Blake Ellis. I'm our Chief Engagement Officer, and I get to work with some of the best and brightest student engagement professionals and higher education leaders in the country, our wonderful team that you see on the screen. Susan Edwards is our Associate VP for Honors Programs and Undergraduate Research. One of the things if you've ever been to a regional meeting is that we on the student engagement team attend lots of those meetings. Susan is traveling right now to the Alabama region. So anybody that's coming here from Alabama, if you're going to your regional meeting, you'll get to see her this weekend over in, I don't know if I should say Crimson Tide country, Auburn Tiger country, whatever your thinking is. But we also have Jennifer Stanford on the call. She's our Associate Vice President of Program Implementation. She works on all our student programs from the College Project to the 5-star chapter plan, editing our College Project journal, really brings a wealth of knowledge about student success. She is also a Phi Theta Kappa alumnus, and her own career started at the community college. And so that's something we're really proud of. Reagan Chastain is on the call as well. She's our curriculum designer. And Reagan, I know you're a someone says Jennifer Stanford is probably the nicest person you will ever meet. I completely agree with that. I will always make some jokes and kind of like give Jennifer a hard time because that's my love language. But I think everybody who knows me knows that I am a Jennifer Stanford, number one position in the Jennifer Stanford fan club, and always a pleasure to work with her. Reagan Chastain, it says curriculum designer, but she does so much more than curriculum design, as evidenced by all the emails that I sent her. Reagan is a former chapter advisor, award-winning math professor. She runs our PTK Edge online programs and does all of our course design. She also engages with regions and speaking at regions, leads our Ed Forums efforts for Catalyst. If you've been in one of those interactive Ed Forums at Catalyst or at Regional Institute, that Reagan is always has her hand in some of that, always pushing people like me who just like to stand up there and talk to be more interactive in the way that we learn and grow. So appreciate Reagan. And then of course we have Patty Van Adder, who is our chapter outreach and development coordinator, former Middle States regional coordinator, chapter advisor, community college graduate, alumnus, Philadelphia Phillies fan, and our representative from the Northeast on the student engagement team. These meetings that we have to engage virtually were really Patty's brainchild, and they have become such a huge part of the programming. So we got to give Patty a thank you for providing the spaces that we can learn and engage and grow. But having said that, I'm going to now turn it over to Jennifer Stanford, and we're going to jump into our afternoon of learning. But please know, whether you're a chapter leader, just getting going in chapter programming, trying to see what you're going to do for your fall programs, whether you're a long-serving or brand new Phi Theta Kappa chapter advisor, we're so happy that you took time to be with us and to learn with us this afternoon. The work that you do makes a difference. The students that you serve really have their lives changed by participating in Phi Theta Kappa programming. And we're just so honored to work with you in a variety of different contexts. So having said that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer Stanford. Welcome, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much, Blake. We have a very special guest, as you were noting, for this presentation. And one of the best things about working at Phi Theta Kappa is that we have such a great pool of chapter advisors that we can call on who are experts in so many topics, especially on personal and professional development. And today's guest is definitely an expert on communication. Matthew Herrman is an instructor of speech communication at the University of Arkansas Community College at Morrilton. And can you guys hear me okay? I was hearing a little feedback. Okay, just wanted to make sure. He also is the honors program orientation course instructor. And of course, that's where his Phi Theta Kappa chapter is. He's one of 3 chapter advisors there and is part of the Oklahoma-Arkansas region. On that regional level, he's received most distinguished advisor awards on several occasions, and internationally, he's also been recognized as a distinguished chapter advisor and even served as a faculty scholar for Phi Theta Kappa's honors program. Currently, he is on our honors program council that develops our honors study topic. His term just started this past summer, so we're looking forward to his contributions on the next honor study topic that you'll be seeing soon. And as I said, he really is one of our top achieving chapter advisors who is graciously agreed to help share some technical writing tips with our audience today. On a personal note, he's married with 2 cats. Same here, Matt. He and his husband enjoy travel, and when he's not working, he's an avid yarn crafter and media consumer. And I have a feeling that those topics might inspire some other questions besides on technical writing. So Matt, thank you so much for being here. We are going to just dive right in. I want to get your take, and we've got a definition that's posted, but just to set us up for this conversation, can you share your take on what technical writing is? Just so we're all on the same page.
Absolutely. And I do take this from a broader communication perspective because I teach speech communication. So although most of the stuff you're going to talk about today is writing, any technical communication covers that technical, detailed, specialized information. But we are trying to distill that information down to an audience that probably does not have a lot of experience with the topic. So the examples that kind of came to my brain immediately with that were textbooks. So you can think about the textbook writers that you are credited on any of those books that you have in your classes, but also your instructors of those classes. When they take that complex concept from psychology or anatomy and physiology and simplify that down for you, that is engaging in technical communication. But one of my favorites, and I'm sure I am not the only person on this chat today who feels that TED Talks are a great way to learn new topics, in part because they take complex, difficult, Dr. Moo, anyone, space biology stuff.
Right.
This is why I teach communication. And we bring it down to a level that even someone like me who has no real good grasp of biology, so that we can understand it and make sense of it. So that's kind of the baseline that we start from.
Absolutely. I love that comparison and example. And it is true. I mean, the definition here about, really understanding that, especially for our students and even advisors who are writing letters of recommendation, students writing scholarship applications, Hallmark Award entries, we hope, when they're working on cover letters and things for their classes. So much of that is, they're given a speech prompt, right? And they're supposed to be sharing things in a way that is clear and concise for their audience. So to really get their points across. And that is something that really is a soft skill that we all need. And so I think all of us, even if we're, in a position that has us writing on a daily basis, it still can be intimidating to have a writing assignment because you're a lot of times starting with a blank page, right? And so want to talk about how to overcome that daunting blank page. And I know you have some great advice to share. So tell us some practical ways to do that.
So my original bachelor's degree was English education. And so that meant a lot of classes with literary analysis, a lot of classes with essays and write about something, anything that you can come up with. That's overwhelming for someone who likes structure. So the best advice I got first was to keep a notebook or a running document of those ideas as they happen. So every time, most of us have kind of been trained, we have a separate notebook for every class, or at least a separate subject for every class in a notebook, starting with a page or two at the beginning of that notebook that you can put some ideas in. Whenever you get a question that comes up, write it down. If there's a quote or a fact that really inspires you or makes you ask questions, write those down on the early end, because those could be a great place to begin a research project. It could be a great place to have a conversation with your instructors later. So keeping those pages separate for a particular subject, starting at the very beginning of your notebook, or leaving it at the end if that's easier for you, but having a place that you can kind of keep records of what inspires you, challenges you, all of that kind of thing. I would absolutely be amiss if I did not say, as somebody who is taught to teach writing kind of thing at the beginning, take time every day. It gets, we think as busy as our lives are, it's hard to do that. But even 5 to 10 minutes at the end of your day to just jot down what inspired you, what challenged you, what questions do you want to pursue the next day? Those places are good starting spots for research projects, for essays, for whatever it is you've got to write, getting those in. I would also, as we've got there, bullet number 4, I would be amiss if I did not talk about PTK Edge trainings. I, just as I'm sure several of our chapters have done now, for us on our chapter at Beta Eta Sigma at University of Arkansas Community College at Morrilton, they cannot be on our leadership team if they have not completed an entire PTK Edge training. They cannot be on the officer team.
Nice.
And that's because we know that those trainings help us. They help the chapter, but they also help the students. And universally, the first one, every single officer has told me they love after they do it, is the Research Edge. And so Research Edge is always the favorite because it has that practical application right now. What you could be doing in your classes, not just for Phi Theta Kappa, what you can be doing every research project. So
Yeah.
getting those started, really helpful. Of course, transfer edge, employment edge, healthcare edge, competitive edge, all of those trainings are vital. But research edge is definitely a good place to begin getting some of those ideas. And then get involved with your honors and action team. Ask your advisors how you can either get involved, take a leadership role, get active in it. Any way that you can do that and start reading that fantastic honors and action guide. Those are so helpful to getting a better sense of that blank page. What do you start?
Yeah.
So the last thing I've got there with this slide is a relatively new tactic. It's not necessarily new, it's just I'd never really put it together this way until I was in the middle of class when inspiration struck. And I was trying to tell my students, here's what you need to do when you're reading, because every time we read something, we think we have to absorb every piece of information on the page, and we don't. If we are assigned an entire chapter or even just a section of a chapter, learn, confirm, and ask. So we start with what we learn. What's something that's new? Maybe you didn't know it before, or maybe it challenged you based on things you've been told in the past. The example that always comes to my brain, always, is in my United States History 1 class in undergrad.
Yeah.
Our teacher taught every class period as the myths of American history.
Uh-huh.
And so I was taught, as most of us had been, Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. There are so many problems with that statement.
Right.
And so learning that, as I read through the chapter for that material, I did learn from it, from that lecture, from the textbook, that is a myth. What we were taught is probably not entirely accurate. So it challenged what I had already thought. Second thing is to look for things that you can confirm. What do you already know, either based on your experience or previous classes or previous study you've done? Confirm that. When you have a book that you can reinforce that, or a study that can reinforce that knowledge, you have another source to back you up. And lastly, what can you ask? A question that can inspire something. Maybe it's you think you understand something, but you would like a little reassurance. So you can ask a question of your instructor or even of your materials and say, I think this is right, but it can actually be something you bring into your classroom. And as a teacher, I hope the other faculty members and former faculty members in this group will attest. We love it when students bring questions to class.
Right.
It saves us stress. Because if you think you get something, but you want to confirm it, the classroom is the place to confirm that. So many of us think if we ask a question, we are going to appear less intelligent. But asking the question can prove that you've been engaging with the reading, which helps us to confirm information at the front of the room. So there are some places that I usually start with on that blank page.
I love that. I think especially those of us who are history buffs are geeking out right now, because I love the turning the lecture into more about what sort of dismantling maybe things that you've learned that really aren't true. So that's a great way to approach the writing example as well. And so we really want to, talk about those specific questions that students especially will get asked, and it could be on a college admissions essay, it could be for scholarship applications, it could be for Hallmark Award entries, as we said earlier. And this is the lament that most judges have of those, is that the students are not answering the question specifically. They're not giving enough specific detail. And so we know they want to tell their story, but it can be difficult for them to organize that into, addressing the very specific prompt or question. And so let's talk about that. What are your strategies for helping students answer the specific question?
So shout out to the student engagement team at Phi Theta Kappa. You all always make sure we have the prompts in advance.
Yes.
And we don't always get that in a classroom, right? Students, we know that the teachers don't always reveal the test questions in advance. We may hint at them, we don't always tell you. But when you have access to the prompts, either from your scholarship applications, job applications, or Hallmark Award entries, read all of the instructions first. Make sure you read everything so you understand what's expected of you on the front end. I do know, having advised a few years now, that with Hallmark Award entries, there are word count limits, and how you allocate those words absolutely matters. So you have to figure out where you want to put the bulk of your information so that you don't overload the word count for the entire entry. So read all those instructions first, read your prompt fully. Make sure you understand kind of what's being asked of you as a whole, because sometimes questions will be asked in multiple ways in order to get you to answer all components of a prompt, or to make sure that you are approaching the entirety of a prompt and not just one area of it. I've been trying to tell my students this last week, especially as we've gotten past that first unit, it's really helpful to take notes from the outset of a unit on things that you might be tested on if you know that's going to be a topic that comes up. So take those prompts, make a page for each note or for each prompt, and start jotting down ideas that you might want to include. And as you do that, you can start formulating that response by revising the prompt or question into the first statement of your response. One of those key things that I was taught as a English major was when they asked those really broad open-ended questions, is to rephrase the question as a statement. Make an assertion based on the question. If you start from there, you have the ability to hone in on what it is the teacher or the reader is looking for. So revising the prompt in that way gives us as readers a little bit of an insight that you are trying to address the question. That's a great thing. Now, something I learned in my previous job on my campus, I worked for a grant, and our grant was designed to get students out of their technical degree programs and into the workforce. And one of the things we had to hone in on was they were working through their application materials and getting their resumes together. Mimic the language that's used, whether that's for a job application, a scholarship application, or for your instructors and your test questions, or your Hallmark Award entries. Mimic the language. Use the language that the question asks of you. So, for example, I know that in Hallmark Awards, we want to see that honors in action theme as a part of that response. We want to see those words. So right now, art and science of play needs to somehow show up in your response, right? Your actual study, your theme that you've chosen, theme 1 through 7, the words of that theme need to appear in your responses as well. Mimicking that language shows that you're paying attention to the details. And as a communication person, I throw that out there. It's the same thing we do. If we see someone nodding at us in front of us, or even through camera, we're more likely to continue, right? Because we're mimicking that behavior. And you might even notice that as you start nodding, someone else will start nodding. And it's the same thing with our language. If we can mimic the word usage, reinforce that language, it's actually going to make it easier for the person reading your materials to come through that. Because
I love that. I love that, Matt, because we say it every year, especially with our honors and action entries, that there are some entries that don't even mention the honors study topic. And I think sometimes chapters are worried about word count, but it definitely can give you points if you're doing that. And then also it's all about, like you said, giving credit where credit is due, because, obviously the reader, the judge, is very interested in the study topic and whatever question it is. So they want to hear your take on it. So I love that. Great advice.
And it's such a simple thing. We kind of overlook it because it's so simple.
Right.
And then with that, usually in those responses or in the instructions, your instructors, your honors and action guide, I know the honors and action guide does it. They give you kind of a guideline of, here are things we're going to be looking for in your response. So honors and action specifically, because we just had this conversation last week in my chapter.
Yeah.
Honors in Action needs 8 sources. 8 is the magic number,
Right.
right? So first thing we started talking about was, well, you're going to need more than 8 sources to start so we can cut back to 8. So as they set their goal, they set a goal higher than 8, knowing that they will eventually have to cut back. So as they read through those instructions, they said, okay, we're going to set a goal of 12 so we can get rid of 4 right off the top. As soon as we know when they're not valid or not helpful, we can cut those 4.
Love that.
And they have that checklist, source 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 12. They have an individual checklist. So as soon as we get one, we can make that mark on our list. It's done. We don't have to start over. You can do the same thing with all of your exams, your prompts, anything of that nature. If they tell you they are looking for a resume as part of your application materials, make sure you make a note. I need to have my resume. If they want your reference letters separately, and I know we're going to get to that later, then you have a note of that. And you can say, okay, I don't pull reference letters with my application. They want those different and separate later on. You have kind of your own checklist. I live by to-do lists. I'm sure I'm not the only person who lives by their to-do list these days. And I go back and forth between my phone and my printed calendar. So I've learned to, kind of make sure I check in with both of those. So as long as you have a place that you're consistently keeping your list that you can go back to, it's a great place to begin. As I said a little bit earlier, outline those responses when you're responding to the prompt. Get an idea of what things you want to bring up. Not everything can be included in every application or entry. I know that with Hallmark Award entries, we run into that routinely. We want to write 6,000 words. We don't have 6,000 words. So what can you actually cover in the space you have? Figuring out what's your priority to get in. With your classes, it could be that same idea. I can't cover the entire book that we read, but I can cover these 3 passages that I think are the most relevant to the conversation or the thing that I'm being asked to prove. So outline that response in advance. It's so helpful to us. And again, it's one of those simple things we were told to do. And we think, I've passed that now. I can just write. Outlines save so many points and headaches later on.
Yeah.
So, and of course, using those rubrics to guide. I know Honors in Action has a fantastic rubric. If you are not spending time with it, I'm not going to say you're doing it wrong, but you're doing it wrong.
You're doing it wrong.
So
That's right.
those rubrics are
It's
there
a
to
planning rubric.
It is. And,
Yeah.
And if you know that those points are going to allocate in a certain way, use those rubrics to help figure out where can you afford to maybe not get full credit, but where do you need to invest more time? If you know, for example, that a project has 50% of its grade coming from the sources you are citing and how well you're citing them, well, then that tells you you should spend at least half of your time on finding good sources and knowing how to credit them.
Yeah.
If you know that your project is going to be evenly distributed, then that's telling you your instructor is already giving you the information. Hey, I think all of this is equally important. You should balance your time accordingly. So using that to help you. The other piece of advice I'm going to throw out there with responding to specific questions, and I'm speaking primarily to job and scholarship applications, college applications. I know I went through this as a student. Almost every single scholarship and job application wants the same information from you over and over again. You should absolutely save your previous responses and come back to them, redesign them, retool them for where you are. The same thing kind of happens with Honors in Action. Although we're ultimately doing new projects each year, the basic things that we're going to be asked to do in Honors in Action or in college project, we're reporting the same kinds of information. So you can see what's been done in the past and use that to help guide your future responses. I know that those high achieving chapters, those ones who constantly get awards, that's one of the things they do is they look at their previous chapter's success. So using that can be a way to kind of get there in that specific question.
Well, and I love also when you were talking about outlining your response and then following it up with the rubrics. That's a great way to make sure that you've got something representing those rubrics. You've got evidence that the reader or the teacher can check off, can actually grade you on, because you've outlined it first and made sure it's lining up with the rubrics. And you're right, that careful planning in the beginning is going to save a lot of time in the end. Okay, we'll move on to our next question, which is certainly a good segue about some of the common mistakes that we all make in our writing and how to avoid those. So I'll go ahead and pull up the next slide.
All right, so those of us who have already earned a degree, we all know we have made mistake of procrastination. And sometimes it's because life hands us a lot all at once, right?
Right.
If we start early, we are more likely to be more effective in the long run. Starting early doesn't necessarily mean you have a full draft of everything. It means that you have a good plan for everything, that you know kind of where your responses are going to go. This goes back to that outline, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know in my own experience, getting my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, that on essay exams, I have earned partial credit because I told them, here are the things I'm going to cover, but there wasn't enough time in the class period to get to all of that in the written out form. So simply just having a few things, hey, these are concepts I wanted to bring up, can actually show that you were thinking about it. You just didn't get to it all. And as we know with procrastination, when we procrastinate, we often don't do our best work. We think we do because we have survived. But that extra little bit of planning on the front end will absolutely be your best friend. It can help you kind of figure out where you're going to need more time later, or maybe on a similar project in the future. As you can see there, we do have this idea of using print or digital resources, specifically things like APA guide or MLA guide.
Yeah.
I understand how convenient citation generators are.
Yeah.
I love the idea of the convenience, but typically speaking, those are not put in by the publisher. They're put in by another student who was struggling. And case in point, one of the textbooks we use in my intro to oral communication class has 4 errors in every citation generator. And it's the same 4 errors, which tells me that as soon as I see it, I know that somebody's used a citation generator and didn't do it on their own. So there is no alternative better than learning it yourself and learning how to credit sources on your own. That said, APA, MLA websites have fantastic resources, video tutorials, handouts, all sorts of things. And I am a huge advocate of Grammarly. There is a free, I see Amber's question, the 4 errors. One of them is that they don't include the edition of the text. That's a problem. One of them is they misspell the publisher's name. That's a very telltale sign if you misspell a publisher's name.
Yeah.
We use APA in my communication classes, not MLA, because APA is where we work typically. And in APA, we don't use first names. We do use their first initial or their first and middle initial if we have it. And every time I see an entry that's APA format but has first and last names, there's a problem. Somebody didn't go proofread. So things like that I'm catching along the way. I have seen a couple where the addition's correct, but the date's wrong. So those kinds of little mistakes do count up. And then, of course, with Grammarly, I have become a massive advocate for Grammarly, and I only use the free version, but I have had to correct Grammarly on more than one occasion based on my expertise knowledge of what I am teaching. But, but as a whole, Grammarly will catch your spelling and grammar mistakes, those basic things like, hey, you probably needed a question mark here. You read
Yeah.
it as a statement, it's a question. Let's correct those things. Those small places to begin are helpful. One of the best things I learned as an undergrad and all the way through my graduate degree, create a reference entry as soon as you cite that source. Don't wait till you get done with your paper because you will miss something.
Yeah.
I also learned, great tactic, keep track of every source you use and what classes you used it in. Have a whole separate document with all of those reference entries you've used through your degree, because you can come back to that source later. In the Honors and Action Guide, I love looking at the Honors and Action Guide for the sources with the annotated bibliography. That's one of my favorite things I look for every time, because I usually pick books for my classroom library and for our school library based on those descriptions.
Yeah.
So even if I don't have time to read that book, I can say, I know this has been vetted. And I
Right.
kind of remember what somebody said this covered. I can recommend that source then. So having those reference entries is really helpful. Writing your own annotation is a great tool too. Just 2 sentences. What's it about? How did you use it? Those things help immensely.
Yeah.
Back to those rubrics, back to those components in the outline. Set deadlines where you want to be for different things. So starting with that outline of, here are the concepts I need to cover, and here's when I need to have my first point, my second point, my third point. Here's when I need to have all of my sources done. Making those little deadlines for yourself can help you as you get closer, because we can modify deadlines, but a lot of us try to cram stuff in at the last week, and it's usually not effective for us. I'm going to throw in here with that, because one of the things, the text that I mentioned, Randy Fujishin's The Art of Communication, recently this summer published in its 4th edition. We are using the 3rd edition in my class because of when we have to report texts. Yes, the auto citation generators are not great. Even in those Word formats, those are also not helpful. But our textbook for my communication class, the primary book we started with, he actually recommends writing the body of your paper or your speech first, and then coming back into the introduction and conclusion, because we don't necessarily know the point we're going to make until we have all the evidence.
Right.
So starting with the body and then coming back to the introduction to say, here's the point I want to make.
Yeah.
And here's the stuff we're going to do to get there. And then in the conclusion, reinforcing it, very helpful. And I've got to credit a former officer team that we had on our campus for convincing me to do shared documents. I was not on board with that when it first came out because I didn't know how to do it. So our students actually started me on using those shared documents. Now we have OneDrive. We are a OneDrive campus or a Office 365 campus, as a lot of campuses have become, either Google or Office 365. Shared documents are really easy. It is a little overwhelming to realize that someone's editing your document while you're working in it. You can get past that. But sharing those documents can also help you kind of get that extra set of eyes on material as you're going through. Somebody else can be reading what you've already written and making those corrections along the way, so you're not having to do a massive proofreading endeavor at the end. You can go back and make sure it still checks.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And there is, I've heard from some chapters, especially for Hallmark Award entries, that, you know, they did, maybe somebody wrote over what someone else had written and wanted to use. And so it's always great to maybe have a backup of what your contributions are, and then put it on the shared document just in case it accidentally gets deleted or edited. Yeah. But that's another great point about, you know, because you're really wanting to polish your writing outside of the online application, because that can be even more difficult to edit. And I don't think it's just Hallmark Award entries and scholarship apps for PTK. I think that's probably true for most online applications, that it can be difficult to edit in that space.
It can. And I will go ahead and mention with it, I know because I primarily use Microsoft Word here on our campus, Microsoft Word will let you track changes. So you can
Oh,
see
good.
the edits people have
Yes.
made. And so that
Right.
may be a way you can say, hey, this person did this change. We need to have a conversation about why that should not have happened, or why this is a better way to do something.
Right.
So
So
you
you
have
can
those.
reject that change and get it back to the regular or the original content. Yes.
Absolutely. Even with
Yes.
auto saving, it will track those.
Yeah. It reminds me of advice that I heard from a speaker once that talked about, and this is related to that blank page syndrome, but just the idea that you're writing a draft. And so you're just kind of throwing your ideas, it's informal. This is not for real. That can help you kind of get over that hump of, oh my gosh, this is so scary. And I'm not, I'm not writing this sentence exactly the way it should be. Well, no, you're just trying to get your ideas on paper. So
Are you
that's
channeling my brain? Because
oh
today in
gosh,
my
sorry, did I?
class, no, really, in my class today,
Yeah.
I made the comment, I'm a third draft writer.
Yeah.
My good work starts around draft 3. The first one is terrible. The second one's manageable, but it's the third draft that I can actually let somebody else look at. And that's true, even if my announcement is, I will not be holding class today, I am off campus. It takes 3 drafts to get 2 sentences for me. So I'm okay with that.
Love it. I love it, Matt. We are kindred spirits.
We are.
Absolutely.
PTK, as Blake said, PTK is a family, and we all have very common things.
Yes, that's very true. That is very true. Well, speaking of that, because, this is a very good segue to this one too, about, as high achievers, we kind of want to do it on our own, right? No small group projects, but getting outside help is actually very smart. So let's talk about that. So what do you recommend in a timeline as well about proofreaders and letter of recommendation writers, all those good things?
As the crew was talking before we got started today, I kind of set a deadline for our chapter a month ahead of our semester end to have most of their work done so that all we have to do in December is write. And that's because we may be losing some of our members over that semester break, right? So we don't want to lose their knowledge and their contribution just because they went away. We want to have that opportunity for them to really still contribute through the best part of the draft, and all we have to do is finish submitting. But with that, usually starting ahead of schedule, kind of knowing that working backwards, our final deadline is, and I know you all know this, the January deadline for Hallmark Awards is?
January 18th is the Honors in Action and College Project.
So knowing that, working backward, thinking, hey, December 18th, we need to have that working draft kind of finalized so that we can send it out to maybe an outsider reviewer. And that's that first outside help thing you'll see. I find outsiders, and outsider doesn't necessarily mean off campus. Outsider means not part of your chapter or not part of your activities. Somebody who maybe doesn't understand your topic, if they can't understand what you've written, that's a problem for them, right? The whole point is for us to be able to get what you're trying to accomplish, that story you're trying to tell us. So starting from the idea that an outsider should be able to get what we're saying, even if they don't have a deep knowledge of the subject matter. And this is, again, why I love TED Talks, right? They can condense that really complex stuff. And for those of us who got to attend Catalyst in the spring, Dr. Moo has revolutionized my brain. I am definitely not a science person. I am not. There's a reason I went to the arts and letters. There's a reason for it, right? But using that outsider's perspective, I'm an outsider of that science stuff. I now have a better understanding of how bacteria from space affects what we do here. And so that helped me, right? She was able to condense that in a way that made sense to me.
Yeah.
That's the kind of writing that all outside readers want, whether that's a scholarship application or jobs or Hallmark Awards. We want to be able to understand what your thought processes are. If you know your team is not strong in the proofreading skills, ask someone who's a good proofreader. This can be a writing lab on your campus, a tutoring lab. It could be an English instructor, especially if that English instructor is not your advisor. having that outside person who's not your advisor and not fully invested in your project, having that person look over it could be really helpful, because they may be able to point out, hey, this sentence doesn't make sense for this reason to me as an outsider. And then I know that APA is kind of the preferred under a lot of disciplines. So MLA is kind of English primarily. So, but get those people who do know a citation format really well to make sure that you're doing those sources correctly. Our chair of our Honors in Action project last year and I had a very long conversation at one point because of where she found a source. She found it through a database, and so that required a different type of citation than if she had the printed journal in front of her. Just knowing that those differences of digital versus print do exist, having someone who understands that and can talk you through those differences is really helpful. So getting that outside help, we don't expect you to be APA experts in college. You're learning it. But if you can get someone who does know and can maybe walk you through those changes or those challenges, that's a good place to get you going so that you can be more successful.
Right. It's really true that chapters should be getting that outside help from the beginning to end of their projects. I mean, that's what they're doing.
That's what collaborators are for.
Right, exactly.
And then you can point out that you had collaborators help you with your writing.
Yes.
Which is another thing you get to talk about in your entry. Yay.
It's a leadership lab. That's what we refer to Phi Theta Kappa as. So, well, they're not only for scholarships, but sometimes admissions apps, as well as even for jobs. They could be needing 1 or 2 letters of recommendation. So let's talk about that, because I know headquarters staff, we get these requests as well. I know a lot of advisors filled these. What are some do's and don'ts of asking for these?
So I love little stories. Okay. And I'm going to share the story that Patty and I talked about when we were first talking about this topic.
Okay.
When I moved out of retail, which is what I did before I went back into higher education, from May to September of 2010, I put in 50 job applications from May to September in as many states, or in 5 states. So about 10 applications per state. And what I learned really quickly was, again, they're going to ask for a lot of the same information every time. They're going to be looking for the same kinds of recommendations every time. So I'm going to start with my second point, and then we'll come back to the 2 weeks. Build a list of supporters. Which faculty members, which advisors, both academic and student organization advisors, where your support team is. Start cultivating that list of people that are always willing to write your recommendation now. The bigger your list can be, the more you can tailor the recommendations to the individual job, scholarship, or whatever it may be. So I had a list of probably 5 professors that I had. I had a list of people that had never had me in a class, but they knew of my passion for education. They knew me kind of on a personal level as well. I had people who knew me from advising, people who knew me from my graduate work, people who knew what I had done as a student leader. And I was able to pull from all of those people based on the type of job I wanted to put in for at that moment. But back to the first thing, give them at least 2 weeks of notice. If you can give them 2 weeks notice, that gives them time to kind of plan for that recommendation. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only person on this call who has a basic form we start from. I practice what I preach. I keep a form of a letter, but I always tailor it based on the actual applicant, right?
Yeah.
But I know I'm going to cover certain things. So I have basic paragraphs that I want to cover, certain concepts. That still takes time, and it takes time to review your materials before we get that letter ready for you. So as much time as you can give them is really helpful. You'll see my third point right below the 2 weeks notice is give a heads up. If you know you're going to be applying for new colleges in the spring because you're going to start next fall, now's the time to ask those potential references, are you comfortable with being a reference for me? Give them that heads up. as we are getting ready for scholarship season, I know we've got like a November 1st deadline for some stuff, right? October 31st, November 1st tends to be those fall deadlines for a lot of scholarships.
Right.
Give them a heads up now. Hey, I've got some scholarships I'm going to be looking at. Some of them may require references. Are you okay with doing it?
Yeah.
And then you can give them the details a little closer, but you have that, right? Also, as an ethical thing, alert them every time you need their reference. We'll talk more about that in a couple of slides, I think. We've got
Okay.
it on there. But
Yeah, you do.
alert people in advance. So when I was putting in for all those jobs, I would usually send out an email about once a week. Hey, I put in for 3 jobs this week. Here's
Right.
where I needed where you may be getting a call.
Right.
That was actually a request from one of my recommenders. And
Yeah.
so that became an easy common practice I did.
Yeah.
So every time I know I'm going to put in for something, I just let them know, hey, here are the places I'm looking at.
Yeah, and I know we've had students that, you know, maybe 6 months, a year later need another reference letter, and maybe it's basically the same, but you still need to tweak it. And so make sure that the person who wrote the original letter is the one tweaking it. Just because you
Yes.
have it as a Word doc doesn't mean that you can go in and make those edits. That is definitely not okay. You need
Just
to,
like speaking, we all have our own
Yeah.
writing voice. And
right.
it's pretty easy to tell when someone else has, undermined your message.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And they usually, I mean, you know, especially when it's just tweaking, when the biggest part of it is done, usually that person is not going to have a problem with it. But again, you do need to still follow the heads up, at least 2 weeks notice. All that is very much appreciated, especially when you don't know what other deadlines that person has.
it is.
And I wanted to just, you know, throw out real quick before we go to this next one about why it's so important to be actively engaged in your chapter, because if you've just become a member and you've only attended the induction, your advisor really can't write much about you other than verifying your membership. So keep that in mind, that it's not, you know, we're saying that for a reason about your own benefit, because those letters of recommendation really mean a lot more when they're very specific. And so speaking of specific, Matt, what are things that a reference writer needs?
So this question from the student engagement team to me was one of those, oh, I actually have a form for that. So when I started getting a lot of recommendation requests, I created a form because I knew I could not keep up with 10 students asking for recommendations in a month period, right? I just can't do that mentally. So things that we typically need, we need to know what job or scholarship you're putting in for and what's a description of that job. Again, just like you need to mimic the language in your response, we can mimic the language in the response in that recommendation. So we can talk about if your job is going to be something about management and you have management experience, then I know to bring that management experience up. But I won't know that if I don't know what you're putting in for, right? We have some scholarships on our campus specifically for single parents. You can only apply if you are a single parent. I need to know if you are so that I can point out, hey, yeah, this person has so many children and this is part of what their experience is. The type of recommendation, is it going to be a letter, a form? We may not know that on the front end, but as soon as you know how that recommendation is going to go in, let that person know. I was shocked when somebody said, hey, I'm going to need a reference letter from you. And I got a phone call asking for information about that student. And I was like, I thought this was supposed to be a letter. I've been waiting for the details to send the letter. And they said, oh, no, it was a call. I didn't know that. So I wasn't prepared for it. Now I can still talk through stuff, but I was kind of on the fly with that.
Yeah.
Helping us prep for that is really helpful. A lot of colleges have shifted to form-based recommendations. So we're doing a lot more like Likert scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, strongly agree, strongly disagree kind of stuff.
Right.
Those are fine. They don't necessarily give me the opportunity to talk about you the way I would like to. But if I know that going in, I'm not going to go over as many details that I might have if I was writing the letter. So helping that. The third thing there, submitting your reference with your application or separately. I know that there are some scholarships through our campus that you are not to see your own recommendations
Right.
because it's supposed to be a secret what they say, right?
Yeah.
Part of the reason why jobs don't ask you to submit letters of reference with your application materials is because they want to have that conversation with your reference about your experiences.
Yeah.
And, you know, we want to kind of give the person the best opportunity to put the best foot forward. So let them know, is this something that you need with your materials, so that they know if there's a time frame to get it to you a little faster. Give deadlines. One of the best things that I ask my students to do is give me actually 2 different deadlines. One, when's the last chance you need this? And you can still have all your stuff ready. Give yourself a couple of extra days, right?
Right.
But then give yourself also a couple of weeks earlier so that there's a check-in point. So if the letter is really needed October 31st, because that's your deadline, you might say October 27th is when I need that letter from you at the last possible second. But you really want it by the 15th so that I can start getting that information and I can go back and make sure that it says what you want me to say, right?
Yeah.
So those little things. I know we are in an educational environment. FERPA is a real thing. Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act.
Right.
Right. I can only tell someone that you were enrolled legally. That's what I'm allowed to tell you. I can talk about, I think you're a great person. I can't necessarily talk about specifics of a class unless you say it's okay. And so I kind of forgot about that the first few years. Not that it's a violation necessarily, but it could raise ethical questions later. So tell them, hey, I really want you to talk about my GPA. Because we're not supposed to report your GPA. We're not supposed to consider that unless you tell us it's fine for us to do so.
That's good.
And if there's something that you really want us to highlight, tell us that, hey, I want you to talk about my leadership in Phi Theta Kappa, so that we know where were you a leader and we can really tailor that information.
Right.
There are some applications that require, you know, an advisor to a student organization or a community member and a faculty member. Those cannot be the same person. So if you're asking me as a faculty member, I'm happy to do that. If you're asking me as a PTK advisor, I have to separate myself from the fact that you've been in my class. And then any accomplishments, awards, or activities, this is where sending your resume is really a good idea.
Right.
Update your resume all the time. As a student, you should be updating your resume at minimum every semester. But every time you attend a conference, a training, you complete PTK Edge programs, those should be put into your resume. And you need to send that out when you're asking for those references so that we know what to pull in. I often don't know that my students have done stuff until I get a resume from them.
Right.
Or I look at their transcript and they said, look at my transcript. Oh, okay, you have taken those classes.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you said that earlier about saving previous applications, because that information, I mean, you can, you know, still put it in a scholarship resume or a career resume, but that information is priceless. You don't have to rewrite it every time.
Exactly.
Gosh, time is going by so fast. I think we have just a couple more, and I definitely want to get this in because this is a question that we get a lot about. And I've heard speakers say to ask more than one person for a letter of recommendation, or more people than you need letters for. And so can you talk about the protocol on that?
It is fine to ask more than one person, but ethical guidelines might suggest tell people you're doing that on the front end. Because we're a small campus, it is not uncommon for faculty members to talk. And if I know that one of my colleagues is writing a letter for you and I know I'm writing a letter for you and we only find out because we were talking,
it's awkward.
It could be a little awkward because we maybe know for that scholarship there's only one faculty recommendation. So why did you do that? Just tell people, be honest on the front end. Most of us will be pretty forgiving, or we may be able to say, hey, I know you've got 3 other people you're asking. This is really not the right time for me to write one. Not because I don't want to support you, but because I don't have time.
Right.
Don't use the same letter for different applications. One, if you are writing a letter, like I'm writing a letter to a particular college for scholarships, like one of our neighboring colleges in our area, that same letter would not apply well to another campus that maybe has a different scholarship set or set guidelines for scholarship. Even though the information might be the same, I may have tailored that knowing kind of what those protocols are for that one campus. So, because smaller communities, PTK advisors, we know people at other campuses. We kind of get that feel for what works and what doesn't. So let them know if you want to use a letter again. They may say, hey, let me just tool that again for you or change that up. And I can't stress this, be okay with getting a no. I have only had to do that a few times in my career. Sometimes it's a timing issue. I have no way to get it done in the time you need it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because maybe it was just not a good connection in my class. And I don't feel like I'm the best person to speak to your academic integrity or your academic prowess.
Yeah.
So I don't want to feel like I'm lying in a letter. So I may say, hey, maybe there's somebody else who you have a better connection with.
Yeah. Or just knows you better.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, when you were talking about the recommendations, for multiple colleges, that kind of gets to, we had a question in the chat from Amber about she's applying to several schools and the letter just needs to be slightly edited for each one. So best way to handle, give them a heads up.
Yeah. And if your application materials are just needing to be edited a little bit, just make sure you're not sending, and I'm going to use R2. We have University of Central Arkansas about 20 miles from us. We have the Arkansas Tech University, also about 20 miles from our campus. Those are the two most common campuses our students go to.
Yeah.
If you mention Arkansas Tech for a application for the University of Arkansas, Central Arkansas, they're going to probably throw that application out on the front end because it's clearly not for them. So just kind of be aware of what you're doing, pay attention to that, and then let your references know, hey, I want to apply to these different places. I may need a slightly different letter for each of them. Most of the time, that's a 20-minute job for us to make those edits.
Yeah.
But let me know on the front end so that you're not trying to back end make something work that doesn't really fit.
Yeah, and going back and forth for 7 different times. So
right.
Yes, absolutely. Matt, this has been so good. Just cannot thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us and our audience. I mean, really, I've learned probably as much as the audience. So I know we are short on time, but again, just want to make sure that you guys know that these are sessions that we do on a monthly basis. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Patty to share more about our upcoming sessions. And I'll put this is another advertisement for PTK Edge that Matt talked about earlier. Just highlight getanedge.ptk.org for all the soft skills training that you need.
Thanks, Jennifer. We're glad that everybody came today. We will get this video processed and posted. So if you can go to the next slide. For me, thank you. We changed the location of where we're putting them. So if you are an advisor, you will find past sessions in the 5-star advisor curriculum down at the bottom of the page, and you will see PowerPoints and videos there that you can use for chapter meetings or to learn more about the topics. This particular session is for advisors and leaders, so we moved that to PTK Edge. It's listed as a course, and you'll just look for Phi Theta Kappa program resources, and you will see videos there that we've done all throughout the summer, and this one will be there sometime tomorrow, Friday-ish. I'm traveling, but it'll get there, along with the link to the PowerPoint as well, and you can go back and reference it. We will be meeting again in the month of October twice with advisors to talk about how to hallmark and setting up delegates and things like that in the beginning process of the Hallmark Awards. But we invite all of the chapter leaders back in November for some detailed discussions on the Hallmark Award entries, best practices, tips and tricks, and all of those things. So we will be inviting you back in November for that. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody, if your chapter hasn't done so, to please set their 5-star chapter goal and the 5-star chapter plan. If you need any assistance with that, please let us know. You have our whole staff is available for questions. So if you have your phone, want to take a snapshot of that, you can email us directly. We are here to support you every step of the way. So
we are getting so many great comments about today's program. So again, just
Yes.
thanks so much to Matt. This was so needed.
Thank you, Matt. This was outstanding. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you at the next session. Bye.